My name is Noah. I'm 27 and I make my home in a small community nestled just beyond the sprawl of Seattle. Life moves at a slower pace here. I live in a simple one-bedroom flat situated above a used bookstore, and my days are spent as an HVAC technician. I troubleshoot failing furnaces, repair air conditioning units, and occasionally deal with a fussy thermostat. It's not a line of work that inspires stories, but it covers my rent and keeps my hands busy. I've always been a man of few words. I've never been in a serious relationship either. I suppose I held on to the idea that it would simply fall into place one day, but that day never seemed to arrive on its own. Most of my mornings were etched into a predictable pattern. I would make a stop at a cozy coffee house a couple of blocks from my apartment, order a large black coffee with no additions, and then drive to my first client. The time was always the same. The order never varied. And serving me each day was the same woman behind the counter. Emma. I figured she was maybe a few years older than me. She had fiery red hair she kept pulled back in a messy bun, intricate tattoos winding up one forearm, and she always dressed in soft, earthy tones. Her smiles were rare, reserved only for moments of genuine amusement. There was nothing performative about her kindness. It was authentic. She possessed a dry, effortless wit that could make people chuckle before they even processed the joke. But my interactions with her were minimal. Large black, no sugar. Thank you. That was the extent of it. For all I knew, she barely registered my existence. I was just another face in the morning rush. Then, on a particular Tuesday morning around 9, I was running late and had to grab my coffee in a hurry. I made it to my first job, a straightforward furnace filter replacement. And when I was done, I reached into my pocket for my phone to check the next address. It wasn't there. My mind raced backward through the morning's routine. The only place it could possibly be was the coffee shop. A small wave of panic washed over me as I hurried back, but a search of the small table where I briefly sat came up empty. I approached the young man at the register, but he just gave me a look of confusion. He mentioned that Emma had stepped out to make a quick delivery, which struck me as odd. Baristas didn't typically leave the shop in the middle of a shift. I resigned myself to checking back later, but it turned out I didn't need to. About half an hour later, as I was standing outside my apartment building trying to use the bookstore's landline like it was the last century, a well-loved silver Subaru pulled up to the curb. Emma emerged from the driver's side, holding my phone. "You left this," she said, offering a small wave. I was completely floored. "How did you have a sticker for your work on the back of the case?" she explained. It wasn't exactly detective work. She passed it to me, and I was so disoriented I nearly forgot to express my gratitude. "You drove all this way just to bring it back?" I asked, my voice betraying my astonishment. She gave a slight shrug, a gesture that seemed to dismiss the effort. "Well, I had a feeling you'd be pretty lost without it. Besides," she added with a faint smirk, "I was curious to see where large black no sugar spends his days." A genuine laugh escaped me, though it sounded awkward to my own ears. "You remembered my order." She tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "Of course I did. You come in every single morning at 8:47 sharp. I notice all my regulars, but you never say much. There's a certain mystery to it." I could feel a warmth creeping up my neck and into my ears. I'm not really a morning person." She smiled then, a real smile that reached her eyes. And for a brief moment, the air between us felt charged, as if the entire dynamic had just been rewritten. "Well," she said, breaking the silence, "you've now said more to me in the last 5 minutes than you have in the past year combined. I guess that makes us friends." The declaration caught me completely by surprise. I let out a nervous chuckle. "I guess it does." She nodded once. "All right, mystery man. Try not to lose that thing again." And with that, she slipped back into her car and drove away. I just stood there on the sidewalk, phone clutched in my hand, my heart performing a strange, unfamiliar rhythm in my chest. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I didn't feel like an incidental character in my own story. I had no idea what to do with that sensation, but I knew one thing for certain. That morning, when she pulled up in her car and smiled at me, was the first time in a very long while that I had felt something undeniably real. That night, sleep was impossible. It wasn't anxiety or stress keeping me awake, but the constant replay of those 10 minutes in front of my building, the sound of her voice, the hint of sarcasm in her tone, that curious spark in her eyes. I think that was the moment it all began. It wasn't love. Not yet, but it felt like something deep inside me had fractured, letting a little light in. For the first time, I felt a pull to keep showing up, not just for the coffee, but for her. In the days that followed Emma returning my phone, I was a mess. Every time I set foot in that coffee shop, my legs felt like they belonged to someone else. My voice would get stuck in my throat before I could even place my order. And she didn't make things any simpler. She began to speak to me as if we were actual friends. It wasn't in some forced, overly cheerful manner, but with a casual ease, the way you might talk to someone you've known for ages. Hey, 8:47. She'd greet me as I walked in, my system still running on a deficit of both caffeine and social grace. I'd manage a smile. Sometimes I'd even mumble a short reply. Other times, I would just stand there staring at her as if I'd completely forgotten why I came in. But gradually, with painstaking slowness, I found a bit of courage. I started responding with more than just a simple thanks. One afternoon, I saw her clearing out the pastry display and heard myself ask, "Don't you ever get tired of this place?" She glanced up, a rag in her hand. "Oh, absolutely. But I've also got bills to pay and a 6-year-old who is convinced that dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets are a major food group. So this is where I am." I was silent for a beat, processing the new information. Then I said, "You have a kid?" She nodded, her expression unwavering. "Yep, Liam. He's in 1st grade. He's obsessed with volcanoes and considers brushing his teeth a personal affront." "What about you? Got a secret family stashed away somewhere?" I laughed. "No, it's just me. I never really got around to the whole family thing." "Still time," she said simply before turning back to her work. That small phrase echoed in my mind for the rest of the day. Over the next several weeks, this became our new normal. I'd stop in for coffee and we would chat about everything and nothing. Her favorite authors, the bizarre requests I got from my clients, the time in college she dyed her hair bright blue and regretted it for a month. She shared stories with an openness that was disarming, as if she was unconcerned with being judged. And the more I listened, the more I began to understand that she was carrying something heavy. She never spoke of it directly, but I could see it in the shadows of her eyes when she mentioned her ex-husband. I could hear it in the pauses that punctuated her sentences. She was wounded, not shattered, but deeply weary. I never made any attempt to fix it. I wasn't trying to be some kind of hero, but I was consistent. I showed up every day. Sometimes I'd leave her silly, self-deprecating notes on napkins. Today's forecast, overcast with a 90% chance of me saying something awkward. She would roll her eyes, but I had a feeling she smiled at them after I left. Then one Friday evening, things felt different. The sun had already sunk below the horizon, and I was on my way home from a late job when I passed the coffee shop and saw her locking the front door. I hesitated on the opposite side of the street. Then, before I could talk myself out of it, I crossed over. "Hey," I said. She turned a flicker of surprise on her face. "Noah, you're past your bedtime." I smiled. "Just got off work." She held her keys in her hand, not making a move to leave. "Want to take a walk?" "I'm not really in the mood to go straight home." I didn't have to consider it for a second. Yeah, of course. We started walking, the silence between us comfortable at first, filled only by the sound of her warm boots and my sneakers against the pavement. A few blocks later, she gestured toward a house that still had its Christmas lights strung up, even though it was nearly April. "Some people just refuse to let things go," she commented. I glanced at her profile, wondering if she was talking about more than just holiday decorations. "Do you miss him?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. She didn't reply immediately. "I missed the idea of him," she finally said. "The person I thought he was, not the man he turned out to be." We continued our walk in silence. Eventually, we found ourselves at a small neighborhood park with a single wooden bench illuminated by the soft glow of a street lamp. She sat down and I joined her. She produced a small thermos from her tote bag. Want some tea? It's probably lukewarm by now, I nodded. Sure. We drank from the cap, listening to the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. Then, so quietly I almost missed it, she said. You're different. Different in what way? I asked. You're not trying to get something from me, she explained, her gaze fixed on some distant point. You're just here. I'm not sure I've ever really had that before. My heart started to hammer against my ribs. It wasn't a dramatic cinematic feeling. It was more like my body was short-circuiting, sensing that I was on the precipice of something significant. I turned to face her more fully. She met my gaze and didn't look away. The air grew thick with unspoken words, with months of silent observation and weeks of tentative friendship. Her eyes, a deep shade of green, seemed to be searching for something in mine. She leaned in just a fraction, a subtle shift in the space between us, and her voice was a low murmur when she spoke. Noah, she said, and my name on her lips sounded like both a question and a statement. Give me one good reason why I shouldn't kiss you right now. The world seemed to stop for a second. My mind, usually a whirlwind of overthinking and anxious thoughts, went completely blank. I had no witty retort, no logical argument, no reason at all. There was only the cool night air, the soft light from the lamp, and the intense focus of her gaze. I couldn't think of a single reason, so I just shook my head, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, and that was all the answer she needed. She closed the remaining distance between us. It wasn't a kiss of fireworks or swelling orchestras. It wasn't like anything I had ever seen in a movie. It was real. Her lips were soft, yet there was an undercurrent of sorrow in the way she kissed me, a hesitance that spoke of past hurts, as if she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to unlock that part of herself again. When we finally pulled apart, she just looked at me for a long, silent moment. I had no idea what to say, so I just stared back. Finally, she broke the silence. I haven't done that in a long time. Me neither, I confessed, my voice raspy. She pushed herself to her feet. I should get home to Liam. I nodded, my throat too tight to form words. There was no hug, no promises for the future. She just offered me a tired but warm smile and walked away into the darkness. I remained on that bench long after she was gone, trying to process what had just transpired, wondering if it meant anything, wondering if I had just witnessed the biggest mistake or the best decision of my life. The morning after the kiss, I was awake long before my alarm was set to go off. For the first time in years, the usual weight on my chest felt lighter, as if something had been lifted rather than added. I actually felt an eagerness to get out of bed. I took my time in the shower, shaved carefully, and put on the nicest, least wrinkled shirt I own. At exactly 8:45, I walked through the door of the coffee shop. Emma was there, standing behind the counter, just as she always was. But the atmosphere was immediately wrong. She didn't greet me with her usual sarcastic nickname. There was no wry smile, only a quick fleeting glance in my direction before her eyes darted away. Hey! I started, but my voice trailed off. A large black, I finished lamely. She nodded, turned her back to me, and filled the cup in complete silence. There was none of the easy banter, none of the shared jokes. When she handed me the coffee, our fingers brushed for a fraction of a second. There was no spark. She pulled her hand back quickly and immediately turned her attention to the next person in line. I lingered for a moment, hoping she might look back at me, give me some kind of sign. She didn't. I left, the warm cup in my hand doing nothing to combat the cold dread sinking like a stone in my stomach. Throughout the day, I tried to invent excuses for her behavior. Maybe she was just exhausted. Maybe Liam had a difficult night. Maybe she hadn't slept well. But as the hours wore on, a more painful truth began to whisper at the edge of my consciousness. She regretted it. I fought against the thought. That kiss had felt so real to me. It wasn't driven by lust or confusion. It was something honest. I had been so sure she felt it, too. But the look in her eyes that morning hadn't been one of someone floating on a cloud of new feelings. It was the look of someone methodically laying bricks for a wall. I gave it a day, then a second. No texts came through, no calls were made. There were no more napkin notes, no offers of lukewarm tea in the park. By the third day, the uncertainty was unbearable. It was a Thursday night and her shift typically ended around 7. I walked to the shop just as the evening rush was dying down. I stood outside on the damp sidewalk for a minute, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm before I finally pushed the door open. Only a couple of customers remained. She saw me enter and her expression tightened for a split second. A flicker of something I couldn't decipher. Surprise, maybe dread before it went completely blank. "Hey," I said, approaching the counter. "Can we talk?" She hesitated, her hands busy wiping down the espresso machine. "I'm closing up in 5 minutes. "I'll wait," I said. I took a seat at a small table by the window. My stomach felt like it was tied in knots with every slow tick of the clock on the wall. At 7:06, she slid into the chair across from me. Her arms were crossed over her chest and her eyes looked shadowed with fatigue. She didn't speak, leaving it to me to start. Did I do something wrong? She blinked as if surprised by the directness of the question. "No, Noah, you didn't do anything wrong." "Then why are you avoiding me?" A long, slow breath escaped through her nose, and she dropped her gaze to the tabletop. "I'm not avoiding you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm protecting myself." I frowned, confused. "From me?" She shook her head. "From what this could become." A heavy silence settled between us. "I like the kiss," she admitted finally, her eyes still downcast. "Probably more than I should have. And that terrifies me." "Why?" I asked. "Because my life is already a tangled mess. Noah, I have a son. I have an ex-husband who has suddenly resurfaced, deciding he wants to play the role of dad again. I don't have the space in my life for feelings that make me lose sleep." I looked down at my own hands, clasped on the table. Every single word I had practiced saying on the walk over now sounded hollow and useless. She leaned forward, her voice earnest. "When I said that you're different, that's part of the problem." I finally looked up at her. "I'm not asking for anything complicated. I like being around you. That's exactly why I'm scared," she whispered. The silence that followed wasn't angry or cold. It was simply heavy, weighted with the things we both wanted to say but knew wouldn't solve anything in that moment. I nodded slowly, accepting her words. "Okay," I said. "Okay, I get it. I don't like it, but I understand." She looked genuinely surprised. "You're not going to argue with me?" I offered a weak smile. I've never been very good at arguing, especially not when I can see that someone is hurting. A sad smile touched her lips. "You're a good man, Noah." I pushed my chair back and stood up. "Yeah, that seems to be my whole deal." She stood as well. "Take care of yourself." "You too." I gave her a small final nod and turned to walk away. Before I reached the door, her voice, soft but clear, stopped me. "Wait." I turned back to face her. "I'm not saying never," she said, her expression pained but resolute. "I'm just saying not now." I nodded again, not trusting my own voice. Then I walked out into the cool night air. That night I didn't sleep, but it was a different kind of sleeplessness than before. It wasn't the ache of heartbreak. Not exactly. It was a profound sense of confusion, of emptiness. I didn't feel rejected. Not in the traditional sense. I felt like I had been put on pause, as if life had started writing a compelling new chapter, but had left the rest of the page completely blank. Over the next few days, I stayed away from the coffee shop. It wasn't because I didn't want to see her, but because I needed to respect what she had asked for. Not now meant she needed space. And the last thing I wanted to be was another man who pushed past her boundaries. I still thought of her every morning. I still found my eyes drifting to the clock at 8:47 out of sheer habit. I still wondered if she ever thought about me. One night, I found myself typing a message into my phone, but I couldn't bring myself to send it. Every word of it was true. "I'm still here if you ever change your mind. I'm not going anywhere." I saved it in my drafts and closed the phone, the screen going dark. Sometimes the most difficult part of love isn't the sharp pain of a breakup. It's the quiet, indefinite ache of waiting. It had been 26 days since I had last seen Emma. I wasn't consciously keeping a tally, but every morning at 8:47, My brain would register the time without my permission. Every time my work van took me past the coffee shop, my gaze would involuntarily flick toward the large front window, even as I forced myself to keep driving. I had not set foot inside since the night she had told me, "Not now." I was holding up my end of the unspoken bargain, giving her space. There were no texts, no surprise visits, no casual check-ins, but my thoughts were constantly occupied by her. It wasn't just the memory of the kiss. It was everything. The specific way she would stir her tea exactly twice before taking a sip. The way her nose would crinkle slightly when something puzzled her. The way she smiled as if she didn't fully trust happiness to stick around. I missed her presence, but even more than that, I missed the feeling of being seen, truly seen, by someone who didn't want me to be anything other than who I already was. Then, on a Wednesday evening, the pattern was broken. I arrived home from work around 6:30, dropped my tool bag on the couch, and threw together some uninspired pasta. I was half watching a documentary I wasn't really invested in when I heard a soft thump just outside my apartment door. I paused the show, listened for a moment, and then got up to open it. The hallway was empty, but there on the welcome mat sat a paper coffee cup my usual size. It had no lid, just a neatly folded napkin sticking out of the top. I bent down and picked it up with a sense of cautious wonder. There, written in familiar blue ink, were 4 simple words. Still black, no sugar. I stared at the napkin for a long moment, half convinced I was imagining it. There was more. Tucked carefully inside the cup was a second folded note. "If you still want to talk, I'll be on our bench this Sunday at 6 p.m. No expectations, no pressure." It wasn't signed, but I didn't need a name. My heart, which had felt so heavy for weeks, gave a powerful leap. I hadn't realized how much weight I had been carrying until that very second, when it suddenly felt a little bit lighter. The next few days were an exercise in torture. I didn't even try to pretend I was functioning normally at work. I dropped a heavy component on my foot, transposed the addresses of 2 clients, and found myself staring out the window of the break room like a character in a melancholy independent film. By the time Sunday finally arrived, I was a nervous wreck. I got to the park 20 minutes early. Our bench sat beneath a tall maple tree, its frame slightly warped from years of exposure to the elements with flakes of old green paint peeling along its edges. I sat down, jammed my hands in my pockets, and my leg began to bounce with an anxious energy I couldn't control. 6 o'clock arrived, then 6:02, 6:05. I coached myself not to panic. Maybe she was looking for parking. Maybe she got held up at home. Then I heard the soft crunch of footsteps on the gravel path. I turned and there she was, Emma. Her hair pulled back, wearing no makeup, dressed in an old comfortable hoodie and jeans. She was carrying a small thermos and a brown paper bag. She looked exactly as I remembered her and yet somehow completely new. She walked over, sat down beside me without saying a word, and held out the thermos. "I brought tea," she said. "It's probably lukewarm again." I took the offered cup. "I don't mind." I took a sip. It was perfect. For a minute we just sat in silence. But this time, the quiet stretched between us like a warm blanket, not an impenetrable wall. Finally, she was the one to speak. I almost didn't come. I looked over at her. "Why did you?" She let out a long sigh. "Because I couldn't stop thinking about that night." "Not about the kiss," she clarified. "About what you said after." "What did I say?" I asked, genuinely unsure. "You said you just liked being around me. That was it. No conditions attached, no pressure." I nodded, remembering. She looked out at the street, watching the cars pass. "I have had so many people in my life try to fix me or treat me like I'm some kind of damaged project they need to rescue. You didn't do that. You just listened. That's all I ever wanted to do." She turned to face me. Then my ex came back into the picture. Not for me, for Liam. He wants to start having weekend business now. He says he's sober again, that he's really trying this time. I remained quiet, letting her speak. "I don't know if I can trust him after everything," she continued. "And then you showed up and I felt something real and it absolutely terrified me." I exhaled slowly. "Emma, the last thing I ever wanted to do was complicate your life." "I know," she said, "and that's what made you so different." Another comfortable silence fell. She reached into the paper bag she brought and pulled out 2 cookies that looked like they were from a grocery store bakery. She handed one to me. We ate them without speaking. Chocolate chip. A little dry but still good. Then she asked, "Do you still think about that night?" "All the time," I admitted without hesitation. "And if I told you that I'm not ready for anything serious," she said, her voice careful, "but that I wanted to start over just a little bit slower this time. Would that be okay?" I turned to her fully. "Are we talking coffee shop slow or park bench slow?" A real laugh escaped her, bright and clear. "Somewhere in between." I nodded then, a feeling of profound relief washing over me. "Yeah," I said, "that's okay." We sat there on that bench until the sun dipped low behind the trees, casting long shadows across the grass. We weren't 2 people rushing headlong into something uncertain, but 2 people quietly acknowledging that this, whatever it was, mattered. When we finally stood up to leave, she didn't say goodbye. She just looked at me and said, "I'll see you tomorrow." "Same time?" I asked. "Same time." She walked off in the direction of her car, and I stayed for another minute, finishing the last of the tea and looking at the now empty bench. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel stuck. I felt like we were moving slowly, honestly, and together. It has been 10 months since that afternoon on the park bench. I can recall every detail of it with perfect clarity. The sound of her voice, the way her hands were wrapped around that lukewarm thermos, the look in her eyes when she said somewhere in between. That moment became our new beginning. Not a grand sweeping confession of love, not a set of binding promises, just a mutual permission to try again. We didn't rush things. That was the most important part. There were no grand declarations, no expectations. We started with texts, then phone calls. I began visiting the coffee shop again, but not with the same rigid daily routine as before. Maybe just 2 or 3 times a week. Sometimes I'd still leave her a note. Sometimes she'd sneak me a day-old muffin when her manager wasn't looking. In early April, I finally met Liam. He was exactly as she had described him. A tiny hurricane of energy. He was all flailing limbs and unsolicited dinosaur facts and very strong opinions about everything. I was incredibly nervous, but Emma made it all feel so natural. I never tried to be a second father to him. I was just Noah, the guy who fixed their broken toaster and happened to know how to draw a Tyrannosaurus Rex with appropriately scary teeth. We started doing small things together as a trio. Picnics in the park when the Seattle sun made a rare appearance, wandering through farmers markets, having movie nights at her apartment. The 3 of us would share a big bowl of popcorn while Liam inevitably fell asleep halfway through the film, and Emma and I would just sit there in the quiet aftermath, too comfortable and content to speak. We avoided using the word relationship for a long time. It wasn't because what we had wasn't one, but because putting a label on it too soon felt like it would make it fragile. Like something we could shatter just by naming it. She still had her difficult days. Sometimes she would retreat into herself, going quiet for hours at a time. I came over once to find her sitting on her bathroom floor, clutching a framed photo of Liam as a baby. She didn't say much, just a whispered. I really thought my life was going to be so different. I didn't offer platitudes or try to fix her pain. I just sat down on the floor beside her. She leaned her head against my shoulder and whispered, "You make it easier to breathe." That was the night I knew with absolute certainty that I was in love with her. It wasn't the dizzy, dramatic kind of love. It was the quiet, earned kind. The kind that doesn't need to shout because it shows up consistently every single day. In July, the HVAC company I worked for had a round of layoffs. Business had slowed, and as one of the newer technicians, I was let go. It hit me hard. And not just financially, it was an emotional blow. I felt small and useless, like I suddenly had nothing to offer her. I stopped texting for 2 days, retreating into my own head. On the 3rd day, she showed up at my apartment unannounced. She stood in my doorway and said, "Don't you dare disappear on me, Noah. Not after everything I confessed that I felt like a loser." She just looked at me and said, "Well, I felt like a failure the day I signed my divorce papers, and yet here we are. Neither of us is broken. We're just rebuilding." She helped me update my resume and put me in touch with a friend of hers who managed the maintenance department for a local school district. I had a new job within 2 weeks. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady and honest, and it was mine. By the time autumn arrived, we had found our rhythm. Liam started second grade. I found a new apartment that was much closer to theirs. It was still my own space, but now it was only a 5-minute walk away. Some evenings I would cook dinner for them. Other nights we walked to the bookstore just to browse the covers and pretend we were sophisticated literary types. And somewhere in between the home-cooked meals, the spilled juice boxes, and the quiet nights on her slightly sagging couch, Emma started to smile differently. It wasn't the polite smile she used with customers or even the wry, sarcastic one she used with friends. This smile was softer, more open. It was the smile of someone who had finally let her guard down and found that it was safe to do so. A month ago, I brought up the idea of us living together. It wasn't a surprise. There was no ring hidden in a cupcake or any other grand gesture. It was just a quiet conversation over breakfast. She was spreading peanut butter on a piece of toast for Liam. I said, "What would you think about maybe finding a place together? The three of us?" She didn't respond right away. She just finished making the toast, placed it on a plate, and sat down at the table. Then she looked at me and said, "You're the first man I've ever trusted enough to want to share a roof with again." She paused. "So, yeah, let's find a place. We didn't make a big deal out of it. We just started looking. We found a 2-bedroom duplex on a quiet Treeline street. It had a small backyard for Liam to run around in and a kitchen with hideous yellow tile. But she loved it, so I did too. Today is our first morning in our new home. Liam is still asleep in his room. Emma is curled up on the new couch in one of my old hoodies, her feet tucked beneath her, lost in a book. The whole house smells like the cinnamon rolls she's baking in fresh paint. I sit down on the couch next to her. She leans against me without a word. We don't need to say much anymore. We just know. After a few minutes of comfortable silence, I say, "Do you remember what you asked me that night in the park?" She smiles without looking up from her page. "I asked you to give me one good reason why I shouldn't kiss you." She closes her book, then sets it aside, and turns her head to look at me, her eyes soft and full of a peaceful light. "And you couldn't." I grin. "I still can't think of one." She puts her hand on mine, her touch warmer and more familiar than anything I've ever known. I lean in and kiss her. It's different now. Not nervous or uncertain, but sure, it just feels right. When we pull away, she whispers, "Thank you for waiting. Thank you for being so patient with me." I shake my head. "You were never someone who needed fixing, Emma. I think I was the one who just needed someone to believe I was worth showing up for." She holds my gaze, her expression unwavering. "You were from the very start. And that's how our story settles. Not with a dramatic proposal or a sweeping speech. Not with violins playing or a view from a rooftop. It's just two people who refused to rush. Two people who carried their scars into something honest. Two people who built a love like you build a home brick by brick, breath by breath. And now this is where we